So I haven't done an Inside the Lords for a long time, and the reason it's been so very many weeks is because inside the Lords, inside Parliament, is so hectic at the moment because the Labour government are absolutely cramming laws through at the rate of knots, and I literally seem to be doing speeches and endless bills and so on and so forth. This is not a sign that they are in control. Now, I am doing this little film the day after Shabana Mahmood has, as the Home Secretary, just announced the most radical shake-up of immigration around asylum that has ever happened in this country. It's a profoundly important moment, and I have to say I was very impressed with her performance in the Commons yesterday. I think that there might be a statement about it at the Lords, and it'll be interesting to see how people respond. I can assure you that there was a certain amount of shell shock amongst the human rights peers yesterday, who all looked like they'd been dragged through several hedges backwards. They can't work it out. And not just the human rights lawyer types, but the Labour Party themselves look in shock, and we could see that from the reactions in the Commons. But look, I don't know why Shabana Mahmood has done this, or what the driving force is, but she sounded like a proper politician, and she might be a Labour Home Secretary. I despise the Labour Party at the moment, as I'll go on to explain, but I was very impressed. I like the fact that she said things like they can sod off. I like the fact that she said, for example, called out the Green Party for their utter hypocrisy in relation to asylum. I thought she spoke plainly and straightforwardly about what is genuinely a crisis, which is that the British state is so dysfunctional that it's completely lost control of borders, completely lost control of who's in the country, why they're in the country, and even when they decide to ask them to be removed from the country, they don't seem to be able to do it. And we know that there's that total joke of removing people, sending them back to France, and they're on the next boat. I mean, the whole thing is farcical. But nonetheless, she seems to have understood why that matters. And the imitation of Denmark, which is a social democratic country, has a social democratic government, being hard but fair, seems absolutely reasonable to me. People are furious that their wishes have been ignored, and they understandably feel it's not right that they can't get council housing, that they can't get NHS appointments and so on, and that somehow if you've arrived illegally, seeking asylum allegedly, fleeing war and persecution but coming from France and so on, all those kind of tropes, that actually somehow you do get better treatment than people who pay their taxes, live here, can't get, British, they just can't get over it. And so she is taking that on board. I think the reactions to her are interesting. I think that the fact that one MP on the radio this morning, one Labour MP, said she seems to me to be pandering to the electorate, and she couldn't even hear herself saying that this somehow, as though somehow that was a problem. Pandering to the electorate is what MPs are meant to do. It's not pandering, it's doing what the electorate told you to do in the first place. I think the fact that so many people have said it won't happen because of all the human rights breaches of law that it will create, it'll cost a fortune. Even the fact that there's a conversation about the fact that the civil servants won't allow it to happen, never mind the lawyers and the judges, is an indication of why we've got a dysfunctional state. And in fact, if the Labour Party can't deliver on this, if there's an internal rebellion amongst Labour MPs, or in fact that somehow the machinery of state won't allow this to occur, then actually it's going to backfire for the Labour Party, but it's going to indicate why this is a crisis that needs to be tackled. I'm hoping that the people who've been trying to alert politicians to the crisis around asylum and migration will have the decency to not be sectarian and support her. The details of the deal, there's all sorts of things that are a bit dodgy. God knows what the 20 years thing's about. The whole thing sounds a bit performative, I get that. But the details are not the point. The spirit and the authority with which he addressed Parliament and said, I am going to deliver what I should have delivered, what every Home Secretary should have delivered, what the British people have demanded, which is to sort this out, was, let's be honest, rare and praiseworthy. Now, the reason why I said that I can't stand and abide the Labour government at the moment is because of the way they're behaving in relation to the Lords and in relation to legislation. They are cramming legislation through. One after another bill is being pushed through. And it's almost as though lawmaking is just a substitute for any kind of political leadership. In fact, we just finished with the Borders Bill. Can you imagine? A Borders Bill which was out of date before we started discussing it. Even the Overton window had moved. We finished it on the day that the Home Secretary had more or less ripped up the bill. But hours and hours and hours of parliamentary time was spent discussing the most mean, piddling, not mean-spirited, but the most petty-minded changes to border controls, which were never going to have any impact, and in which the minister consistently played yes, but we've got to think about why family reunion's importance and so on, and basically implied that any of us who objected were somehow to the right of Genghis Khan, fascist, all the usual stuff. And so now, he's going to have to eat his words, right? But it's more that they spent so many hours on it. There's been a wide range of bills which just are making laws for the sake of it. And by the way, draconian laws. We've also got a situation, 2 bills I'm involved in, which is the crime and policing bill, which is precisely that. They're going to criminalise, and with, threats of prison for breach of a respect order, which I can assure you will not bring respect into society, and which are a hard, calculated attack on antisocial behaviour, which won't tackle antisocial behaviour at all, just gives the local authorities, councils, the police, the jurisdiction to go round and basically criminalise people, but on a civil standard of law. It's a disgrace. And they're bringing in a whole suite of new laws that if you break them, you get threatened with prison. That's going on. And it's an enormous bill, huge. You can't pass legislation that's safe that way. And at the same time, they're bringing in the sentencing bill. The sentencing bill, in the meantime, says, we're not going to send anyone to prison. We're going to, you get less than a year. You won't get to see inside a prison. We're going to turn suspended sentences from 2 to 3 years. So if you get 3 years, your sentence will be suspended. That'll be the presumption. A whole new scheme about people being let out of prison. So talk about contradictory. It doesn't make any sense. And people are tearing their hair out. We've been staying in the Lords till very late, sometimes 1 o'clock. Votes are being pushed through left, right and centre. I can't begin to tell you how irritating it is. And in the meantime, we've got the assisted dying bill. Now, I want to just remind everyone that I have spent a lot of the last few weeks discussing the tobacco and vapes bill. You might think, what's the relationship? In the tobacco and vapes bill, the Department of Health stand there and they basically say that if you ever would have the temerity to do something like choose a recreational habit, like smoking, then they're going to do everything to stop you. They're going to throw the book at you to stop you because it might mean that you die early. Now that's, as a former smoker, you would think that then they might say, oh, but we found this thing called vaping, which is a really good smoking cessation tool. But oh no, the tobacco and vapes bill is going to ensure that you're not actually have easy access to vapes. Certainly not flavoured vapes. That would be too much enjoyment by anyone. It can't have anything that's an enjoyable way of giving up smoking. Anyway, the whole discussion around public health implies that the state has an obligation to ensure that you live forever and ever and ever, as long as absolutely possible, that if you make choices that risk your health, the state's going to step in, stop you, and therefore interfere in your liberty. At the same time, this same government has allowed a private member's bill started by a Labour MP, Kim Ledbetter in the Commons, she's the sponsor there, and Lord Charlie Faulkner in the House of Lords, Labour peer, to push through a bill on assisted dying, which means that it will be far too easy for the state to, guess what, prematurely end your life. I mean, make it make sense. And the same health minister, you have to listen in one place, is standing there as the health minister around assisted dying. The assisted dying bill is one that needs to be fully and totally scrutinised in the Lords. It is actually not fit for purpose. Attempts in the Commons to introduce important safeguards to ensure that if you are going to have state-assisted dying, or suicide or whatever way you want to call it, that it should be absolutely watertight. Most of the amendments were kicked out in the Commons. They just wouldn't accept them. And now here we are in the Lords, and there's, I think, 1,000 amendments, nearly 1,000, certainly well over 940 last time I looked, amendments. And of course, Lord Faulkner, Kim Ledbetter, is saying this is absolutely disgraceful. The Lords are trying to filibuster this bill. It never dawns on them that maybe you need that many amendments because actually the bill is not fit for purpose. They don't usually complain when they try to amend the Rwanda bill, the Rwanda scheme bill, so that it would absolutely lose all sense of itself. They didn't mind how many amendments there were hundreds and hundreds of amendments on the online safety bill, which I had to sit through, but that was all right because they were amendments they all supported. But now, because there is an attempt, by the way, cross-party opposition to assisted dying, as well as cross-party support, of course I'm not suggesting it's all one way, but lots and lots of people in the Lords are very concerned. And in fact, quite a lot of the Lords who are putting in amendments support assisted dying as a principle, but think this bill is not fit for purpose, think it's unsafe, think it's going to lead to assisted death on the NHS. It's going to cost a huge amount of money to administer, which will take from hospice care or palliative care or important life-saving, will fundamentally alter the relationship between doctors and patients, all sorts of things. And I'm going to be actively involved in taking that on. But one of the things that is really bemusing is that Charlie Faulkner and Baroness Hayter is another one who said it is disgraceful to use the House of Lords to block the will of the people. We haven't got the democratic right to do that. What? Are they kidding me? They're consistently trying to use the House of Lords to block the democratic will of the people. And one of the surefire ways of knowing what they really think about this is to look at Brexit, which was absolutely the will of the people. The House of Lords tried to block Brexit on a wide range of occasions, and guess what? I think it's 25 of the people from the House of Lords who signed a letter saying we shouldn't block the assisted dying bill actually were actively involved in trying to block Brexit and using the Lords to block Brexit. So the double standards know no bounds. Just finally, it's a very peculiar atmosphere. We are watching, despite Shabana Mahmood's brilliant intervention, we are actually watching the Labour government implode. They don't know how to govern. They just appear to have lost control over their own legislation, let alone how they should manage the day-to-day lives of ordinary people in a proportionate way. The mess around Rachel Reeves and the budget is just an example of the absolute, and let me be frank, shit show we're in the middle of, where a budget, which according to convention should be impaired, we shouldn't know anything about it. It used to be the case that any Chancellor who discussed a budget, even whispered a discussion of the budget before the announcement of the budget, would be in serious trouble. Now they make announcements every 5 minutes, change their minds. They are wrecking the economy. Genuinely haven't got a clue how to introduce the elements that would allow growth to occur. In fact, they're over-regulating everything in such a way that growth will never occur. And I'm genuinely scared. You know, I don't want the Labour Party to mess up the economy. I don't want anyone to mess up the economy. So that's happening on the one hand. And the atmosphere on the Labour benches is like civil war. Not, you know, because they're mutinous. Their own backbenchers don't believe what they're doing. So everything is done in bad faith. And as I say, the one bit of control they've got is the timetable for pushing through legislation. So then they behave like absolute authoritarians on that. We've got to get this bill through. We can't give it another day. We've got to finish. We're going to stay till 2 a.m. to get it through. We're going to have these votes. 3 land whips every time you look. That's their way of asserting control. It's completely anti-democratic, dangerous, because they're out of control where it really matters. And then on the other hand, we've got the Conservative Party, who, if we're frank, just can't, you know, the sense of betrayal of ordinary people in this country is so profound that no matter what the Conservatives do, they just can't win the British public round to trust in them anymore. And I have every sympathy with people. So you have a Conservative Party that are effectively demoralised and they might call the Labour Party a zombie government, but we have got more or less a zombie opposition. Now in the Lords, I have to say, that zombie opposition is a little bit livelier. There's a few more independent people, and I have enjoyed in some instances allying myself with them. But practically every bill that I'm discussing was introduced originally by the Tory government, including the Tobacco and Vapes Bill. So it's quite good fun uniting with Tory backbenchers opposing the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, until I remembered that nobody would have brought in a stupid generational tobacco bill unless Rishi Sunak hadn't brought it in. Nobody would have thought of it. It's never been introduced anywhere in the world. So that's what it's like. And similarly, the Crime and Policing Bill, I've actually ended up forming a relationship with the Lib Dems, who it's the only time that you find any kind of vague liberalism in the Lib Dems is occasionally on civil liberties. And to their surprise and mine, we're united. And the Conservatives actually are just as draconian as the Labour Party when it comes to things like civil liberties in so many ways. So they're not allies over there. So I do what I can as a non-affiliated peer, and I will, I promise, do more Inside the Lords to keep you informed.